Good morning, everyone. My name is Maureen Shuell, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Electric Mobility Canada. It's the National Association to Advance Electric Transportation. I'm pleased to be moderating today's discussion with Dianne Saxe, who is the Green Party of Ontario's Deputy Leader and also the candidate for the party in University Rosedale. We're really pleased to be in conversation with her today to hear about her party platform in relation to electric mobility and how it relates to the future of the province. Joining me is my colleague, Bora Plumptre, who is the Director of Research for Electric Mobility Canada, as well as Cara Clairman, who is a board member on Electric Mobility Canada. She's been the chair of the Ontario Pre-Election Task Force, and her day job is President and CEO of Plug and Drive and the Discovery Center, and all of the good things that she does are going to come out in her questions today as well. Also, we're joined by Emma Jarratt with Electric Autonomy. She is the managing editor, and we're really pleased to have her expertise as well as a leading publication in electric mobility. But let me not spend too much time on introductions, but I do want to just go over a couple of fine points before we get started to say that we're going to be offering Dianne some questions and hearing about her platform and some of the vision for the future for Ontario from her party's perspective. A little bit of housekeeping to say that in this platform, you can ask questions in the chat. There's no social media during this time because we do want to leave this conversation embargoed until we release it publicly. We are recording it, and as I said, we'll be releasing these next week so that voters can have a chance to see what the electric mobility platforms are of the parties. We're going to start with a short opening comment by Dianne Saxe. She'll be able to open it up for us, and then we'll proceed with questions from our questioning panelists. So with that, I'd like to offer Dianne Saxe the floor.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for all your work in promoting electric mobility, a really pivotal part of our future. Your members all know, I'm sure, that the climate emergency is here and it changes everything, and that we still have a small window to save the future. I chose the Green Party because based on my 46 years of fighting for the public interest and my work as the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, it's the only one serious about climate. So from where I sit, the Liberal platform is way too timid and imagines that big things can be done with little tweaks, and I don't think it can. And the NDP platform cannot work because it depends on extracting $30 billion from Ontario industries, which would put them out of business. Our experience has been that the NDP and Liberals only say no to bad ideas like sprawl and 413 when Greens go first. And that the NDP and Liberals vote to cancel. When they vote to do things to keep fossil fuel driving cheap, which is the absolute opposite of the direction we need to go in. So climate only gets serious attention when Greens are at the table. And I'm very proud to be the principal author of our climate and environmental plan, the roadmap to net zero. And you'll see that electric mobility is a big part of that plan. But electric mobility of every kind, talking about personal cars, yes, when cars are needed, but also heavy vehicles, electric buses. We need 4,000 additional electric buses to help triple transit in the GTA. We need electric bikes. They're the fastest growing type of electric vehicle around the world and are outselling four-wheel electric, I'm told, in the United States and other places. We need electric vehicles, electric mobility at every level, and it will also help with many other problems, including air quality, health, our electricity system balance. The electric mobility is the way to go, and not only that, it's fun. I love my electric bike.
Thanks for those comments. That's probably my next bike. Still not there yet. Thank you very much for those introductory comments. It's nice to hear you talking about all types of electric mobility, because at Electric Mobility Canada, we are dedicated to all modes as well. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Cara for the first round of questions.
Thank you very much, Maureen, for inviting me today. And it's a pleasure, Dianne, to see you again. And Thrilled to see you as part of this campaign, and all the momentum around your campaign is really exciting to watch. Just a few questions. We're sort of going to do this in round robin style, where I'm going to ask a few questions and then we're going to move on to another panelist to ask you a few questions. So you've given us a little taste of your platform in terms of electric mobility, but I wanted to give you an opportunity just to perhaps elaborate on what the Green Party would do to encourage more Ontarians to make the switch to EVs, and you can include EVs of all kinds, as you've mentioned.
Well, lots of things. I mean, one of the pieces that we've pointed out is our fee-based system for the purchase of electric vehicles. And a fee-bate has two parts, a fee and a rebate. So there's no taxpayer funding. You'll see in our roadmap, we've been really careful to track what we're going to spend the taxpayers fund and where that money comes from. But for electric vehicle incentives, it makes sense to have a fee-bate where people who buy gas guzzlers pay more, and that money is used to level the playing field for people who buy electric zero-emission vehicles or very close to it, get a big help to level the playing field on that upfront cost. This is meant to be temporary. We only need fee-bates until the upfront cost of EVs reaches parity with the upfront cost of gas vehicles. We know that the lifetime cost is already less to have an electric vehicle for many use cases, especially people who drive a lot, like people in remote and northern areas. But right now, that upfront cost is certainly a significant disincentive, and we need many solutions to deal with it. So the fee-bate is one of them. And we provide a fee-bate for, in the first year, the average fee-bate, the available fee-bate would be up to $10,000 for vehicles that are zero emission, on top of the federal incentive, and $5,000 for the long-range hybrids. The short-range hybrids, we wouldn't give anything to. We also have and that's only for the lower cost zero-emission vehicles. Luxury vehicles aren't covered. We also have an incentive. We would take over the incentive that Mike Brigham's been paying for, that you've been distributing for used vehicles, and in addition, provide a $1,000 incentive for e-bikes. So incentives is one of the important pieces. A second thing, of course, is that we need to have a lot more rapid charging. And one of the ways that we can really see cumulative benefits is to assist with rapid charging for car share organizations. So owning a car is really expensive. It costs the average family $10,000, well, probably quite a bit more a year, because you can also have repair costs, and you have to take into account the parking costs, which can be very high at both ends. So having a car share organization can really reduce the need for people to have a personal vehicle, but for them to switch to electric vehicles, they need rapid charging infrastructure, and that's going to need some government help to get started. So we've got that for 2 years, an immediate write-off of the full cost, and $1,000 rebate for each rapid charger installed. We need to see more programs like the one that Mike Brigham's Foundation funded in Northern Bruce Peninsula, where low cost or free charging infrastructure is provided to small tourist establishments, and they distributed something like 50 chargers all over the Northern Bruce Peninsula to make it much more practical for them to attract electric mobility tourists, and also to kickstart an electric mobility system there. And then, of course, we've got money for electrification of transit, electrification of GO, and let's not forget school buses. School buses, we have I was really surprised to learn that although we only have 7,000 transit buses in Ontario, we've got 22,000 school buses. And a lot of those buses are old, and the older buses, especially any bus built before 2008, have really high pollution, and that's especially bad for children, who are the ones, of course, that go in the bus. And school buses are really good matches for electric mobility because they work predictable hours, can be charged the rest of the time. So getting the 4,000 dirtiest buses off the road and converted to electricity or replaced with electric buses would help with our kids' health, would reduce running costs for the school boards, and be part of the electric mobility revolution. So then we've got a whole just separate strategy for supporting the electric vehicle supply chain. We've got other strategies for encouraging people to switch from a personal four-wheeled vehicle to a two-wheeled vehicle, like dramatically improving the safety of bike lanes, which make it easier to get around. And of course, if we plow the bike lanes properly, the way they do in Finland and Norway, Finland and Montreal and other places, then again, we can make electric two-wheel mobility practical all year round. And I ride my bike pretty much all year.
I think you covered
comprehensive.
A lot of topics that we wanted to
Comprehensive,
cover.
Dianne.
Sorry
Maureen, I was thinking it would be a great opportunity if people want to read more about the Green Party platform. Maybe we can post a link in the chat for people, because it sounds, and I've had a chance to take a look at it. It's extremely comprehensive and really something I think people who care about these issues will want to get behind. Just one last question for you, Dianne, in terms of supply. You may have heard that this is really a supply crunch right now. As an organization that's all about education, we're out there getting people excited about EVs, including e-bikes, by the way. And then when we send them off to try to find an EV, it's really, really hard, and they have to get on a waiting list. What would the Green Party do to help improve the supply of EVs in the province?
Well, the first thing is, Cara, better than anybody, is our supply crashed when Ford canceled all our electric vehicle incentives and had EV chargers torn out of public spaces. So we were building up a supply of EVs in Ontario and before Ford was elected. And when he came in and was so openly hostile to the market, the manufacturers shifted elsewhere. So if we want to have electric vehicle supply directed to Ontario, then it has to be a strong and welcoming place for people, for the government to set those rules. So reinstating some sorts of incentives, I think, are going to be important. We've got a ZEV mandate in our platform, which also puts requirements on the auto companies to sell zero emission vehicles here. I mean, sure, clearly there's going to be some challenges with the supply chain because we've fallen so far behind. But if we want to be winners in the new climate economy, which is coming, and not just continue to be losers, then we need government to set the conditions that make it easy for people to comply. And we've been going in the wrong direction. We've got a lot of ground to claw back.
100%. Thank you so much, Dianne. I'm going to pass it over to Emma to ask you a couple of questions.
Thanks, Cara. So Dianne, I wanted to pick up on a thread you had with Cara, just talking about getting adoption back up to where it needs to be, but also the charging component. Somebody much more pithy than me said a while ago that, you could have EVs being given away for free, but if people don't feel like they can charge them, they will not be taking them home. So in terms of the public charging network component, getting appropriate charging speeds and, having the network built out to non-urban areas, what does your party propose to answer that challenge?
Well, obviously, we need to pay attention to charging. It's particularly important in more rural and remote areas because they don't have the kind, you can't just walk to wherever you need to go in most rural areas, and especially when it's minus 35. So we know that widely distributed charging is very important. And I already mentioned the extraordinary success of this small pilot project in the Northern Bruce Peninsula, which showed how much you can do very quickly if you make it simple. Getting an EV charger shouldn't be a bespoke process like ordering a Harry Rosen suit. It should be simple and bulk purchases and not have to guess which contractor knows what to do. So that's the sort of thing that the Brigham Foundation made sure it was really simple. people didn't have to do any research. They just had to sign up and pay a little bit of money. And so we know that that can work to roll out EV charging in rural and remote areas. In urban areas, the problem is different. Big problem we have, for example, in University Rosedale, the riding I'm running in, is that most people don't have a driveway. So people who do have a driveway on their property that they own can install EV charging. Yeah, although you have a really long wait for, on Toronto Hydro, but anyway, moving right along. But all the people who don't have a driveway are stuck. So we do need to have much better leadership from our electric utility. Electric utilities can play an enormous role in building out transportation. And I know that Kutrick has identified the lack of utility involvement as the concrete wall blocking the real uptake of electric vehicles in transit. And I think very much the same for home vehicles. We've got all those poles along the road. It is possible to make those charging places. As the vehicles improve and have longer battery lives, especially again, people in urban areas, we wouldn't normally exhaust the battery in a day. So you don't necessarily have to charge every day. We don't necessarily have to have a charger for every car. But it's really important for the utilities to think about the potential benefits of having widespread bidirectional EV charging. So your audience probably knows, I hope, about the memorandum of understanding that's just been reached in the United States between the US government and other agencies to have a big pilot of bidirectional charging as a way of providing multiple benefits to the electricity grid as well as to transportation. So in particular, if we have bidirectional charging, then we know electric vehicles, particularly personal vehicles, can charge at night when we have excess power. That will increase the revenue for our electricity system, which will help reduce per unit costs. And, which is really critical, they can provide peak power for the comparatively small number of hours where our system is close to breaking. And what you may not all realize is that a totally disproportionate amount of the cost of our electricity system comes from meeting those small number of peak hours. And electric vehicles, as their batteries get bigger and stronger, can really meet that peak need in a way that brings down the total cost of our whole electricity system if we have bidirectional chargers. So there's 3 pilot projects just approved, I think a week or 2 ago in California. Lots of work going on across the United States. We should be doing it too. I know there's some work at Electra as well, where we can't solve individual problems in their silos, but if we put them together, we can make so many things better.
Thanks for that. Emma, did you want to follow up with another question?
Well, I thought I might intervene if
Okay.
it's all right with Emma, because
Sure.
I thought Dianne made a really interesting segue into implications for the power sector. And I know Emma has a couple of questions on that, so I will return to her. But I just wanted to double click into something that you said, Dianne, about the environmental benefits of electrification in the transportation sector. I'm sure you're aware that there was some recent reporting in the Toronto Star uncovering recent projections from the IESO, the grid operator, independent system operator in Ontario, projecting the possibility that greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation could skyrocket over 400% by the end of their projection period out to 2042, which would really significantly undo the gains achieved during the provincial phase out of coal-fired power. And so given that electric vehicles are only as green as the grid powering them, what is your vision for the future of Ontario's electricity grid, and you've spoken to this a little bit already, but what approaches can we take to preserve and enhance the environmental benefits of going electric? And if you can touch on it a little bit, is there a risk in the current environment with energy prices where they are about moving too fast and accounting for this inflationary price context that that consumers are having to deal with across the board.
When it comes to climate, there's no longer such a thing as moving too fast. Every bit of delay means more death, more suffering, more droughts, more fires, more loss. What we do know is that, well, the most important thing we can do for that is to change governments, because the current government is pretty much wholly destructive on everything I care about. Simple, aside from that, simple answer is the carbon price should apply to all electricity generation emissions. There's absolutely no excuse for exempting them as if they were a steel plant that had to sell their product on an international market. And if we did that, if we properly applied our carbon fee, then emissions from our electricity system would virtually disappear pretty much right away. I mean, the gas companies are winning the bids because they're not paying for their pollution. In terms of the larger question of our electricity system, yes, under the Ford government, we are going in exactly the wrong direction. Although I wouldn't agree that it's the same as if we didn't phase out coal. I mean, remember that the big reason we phased out coal in Ontario was not climate, it was health. And you guys probably remember the yellow smear across the horizon that we used to have. We had 53 smog days in 2005. Those were brutally hard days for anyone with asthma, including my late husband. And they damaged everything. They dirtied laundry, they damaged masonry, they eroded infrastructure, and of course they damaged our lungs, increased the risk of cancer and many other things. Natural gas, well, so-called natural gas, it's as natural as arsenic. Burning gas is not as dirty. It certainly has severe climate effects and air quality effects, but it's not as bad as coal. Nevertheless, the answer remains that under the current government, our grid is getting dirtier fast. It's not just that they're spending billions of dollars to encourage and increase gas generation and cancel 752 clean power projects for power that we need. They're also selling, or have under their watch, Ontario Power Generation is selling the cleanness of our grid secretly into the US. So those are all big problems and need to be solved. And our, the first part of any plan to clean up our carbon and air pollution is to clean our electricity system. And we know how to do it. And it's really very simple these days. With proper pricing, with solar and wind storage, we can and must double our electricity system. If we're going to displace fossil fuels in Ontario on anything like a science-based pace, then we have to replace virtually all of those fossil fuels with efficiency and electricity. Most of that's going to come from electricity. That requires us to double our electricity supply by 2040. We can do that without increasing the cost of electricity, but we have to be smart about it.
Well, thanks for that. I was remiss at the beginning of our discussion not to give your background, but you're definitely demonstrating what your background is. I should have started with this to say that Dianne Saxe has spent her career as an environmental lawyer, and she was the environmental commissioner for the province of Ontario between 2015 and 2019. And we see that you have a very deep understanding of the issues in the province. So thank you for sharing them with us. And now I'm thinking for the next round, why don't we go back to Emma to see if you'd like to follow up with another question. Oh, you're on mute though.
Second time I've done that, sorry. I'd just like to hear more about what you were saying in answer to Bora's question and what you said before he followed up with you, which was the utilities component and getting these very, very key partners and players to the table to de-silo, because I agree with you, we're in a very sectioned off phase of things right now, but to de-silo and combine best practices, knowledge, resources, and intention to move in the same direction. What do you envision will bring everyone into those discussions to get results?
Self-interest. That's often what motivates action. So that's part of why a carbon price, which has to be applied to electricity generators, is so effective. We also see the financial opportunities of combining cells being seized. So I have a podcast, Green Economy Heroes, that I started so that I could get some hope and talk to green business leaders across Canada. And one of the companies that I interviewed last year makes, maybe it was earlier this year, makes their living helping business owners save money on their electricity bills by treating their whole building as a battery and including using electric vehicles plugged into the building to help meet its peak load. So those opportunities are already being recognized and being seized. We also know that there is a tremendous power if you actually get people around the same table. And the responsibility for that, I mean, some of that rests with our municipal governments. Toronto Hydro, for example, it's wholly owned by the City of Toronto. Toronto City Council gets to direct Toronto Hydro. They have a shareholder direction to Hydro, which right now is totally feeble, isn't tied to Transform TO, doesn't give any incentives to Toronto Hydro to get serious about electric mobility, barely mentions the existence of climate change at all, and is totally obsolete. And that's part of why Toronto Hydro is such a laggard at anything to do with the green economy compared to in other utilities such as Electra, just around us, or if you look at utilities like Sacramento Municipal Utility, which has got one of the top sustainability ratings in the United States. Electric utilities can do so much and ours isn't. And that is the fault of our councillors, who will, repeatedly refuse to update the direction, appoint appropriate people to the Toronto Hydro Board, and make that part of how their success is judged. Ultimately, political decision-making matters enormously, and that's why elections matter. If we don't have climate leaders at the table, we get bad rules. And people like you are pushing uphill, and it shouldn't be that way.
Oh, those are strong words. Thanks for that. And thank you, Emma. We're going to go back to Cara with another question.
Thanks, Maureen. Dianne, you've shown like your depth of understanding in all these different areas. And I did just want to touch back on a comment you made earlier around, there's lots of people, for example, in your riding and all around Toronto who don't have access to a driveway. My latest information is that close to 40% of Torontonians live in a MURB. And so that's a, multi-unit residential building. And so there's a whole lot of folks who might be interested in EVs, but find that's a big barrier for them. So I wanted to hear if you had any plans for multi-unit. And as a second sort of question that is sort of tied to this is the equity question, which is, many people live in apartments. Many people will say when we talk to consumers, oh, I'd love an EV, but they're so expensive, and that we need to do more to help everyone benefit from electrified transportation. So sort of a bit of a double header, but MURBs and equity, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's talk about MURBs first then. Clearly, we do need to require multi-unit residential buildings to offer charging. If they offer parking, they have to offer charging. In fact, you'll see in our plan, we say that for anybody that offers parking. Any new or resurfaced parking, they have to have, just checking, yep, any new or resurfaced parking areas have to have EV charging. And existing parking lots and garages, public or private, above ground or below, have to add EV charging to 25% of their units by 2024, 50% by 2030, and 75% by 2035. We have to have charging available where there's parking. Now, at the same time, we don't need so much parking. So one of the first things we would be doing is eliminating minimum parking requirements, because that adds significantly to the cost of housing. In urban areas, the most important thing is to make it easier for people to get around without having to own a car, and that allows them to save, as I say, more than $10,000 a year. People can't do that if they don't have good alternative transportation to where they need to go. So that's partly a question about 15-minute neighborhoods so that there are more local stores and workplaces. And it's partly about having much better transit. So one of the things we would do is reallocate public space, which is overwhelmingly devoted to cars, to walking, biking, and transit. So it would be harder to get around in a personal vehicle, but much, much, much easier to get around without a personal vehicle. We know that, I mean, subways are great. They take a fortune. They take a long time to build, and they cause enormous disruption. Creating bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes, they're fast, they're cheap, they're transformative, and they, and especially if you pair them with an electric bus, low vibration, quiet, clean, you can have Wi-Fi in it. So you can get really good quality transportation. And that takes me to the equity point, because people who need really good transit are especially lower income families. It's astonishing to me that of the poorest 10% of our population, still half of them are spending a very high percentage of their disposable income owning a car because they have no other way to get around. And that is a huge burden on them. And they have the dirtiest cars, and they're breathing the dirtiest air and suffer the worst health outcomes. So making really good transit better, and particularly transit to the suburban areas where a lot of lower income people live, that can do a lot for equity. A second solution to equity, which can also help with the multi-unit residential point, is, and I think I mentioned this earlier, this idea that we all have to own everything we need is silly. It's expensive, it's wasteful, and we just don't need it anymore. So much better car share systems so that when you need a car, it's available nearby, but you don't have to own it, can again save families a lot of money, and it dramatically eases the charging problem. Because if you don't own the car, you don't have to be responsible for charging it. Well, then you just have it when you need it. And that gets back to why it's so important for us to provide real financial support to car share systems so that they can have charged vehicles available when people need it. And so bottom line is, we really can't afford to keep living the way we do now. And it's going to get worse, not better. So the answer is to be more innovative and try things differently that reduce the overall burden. And we can do that.
Great. Well, thank you for bringing up car share and multimodal and all of those topics that are also close to our heart. For our next question, we're going to go to Bora, who has something for you.
Okay, well, thank you, Maureen, and Dianne. Thank you for sharing this just comprehensive knowledge of all the different aspects of our transportation transformation. I am so pleased to hear you talk about micromobility, and hopefully this, the other options beyond personal vehicle ownership that I think really are important to the future of moving Ontarians and moving goods around the economy. But I wonder, hopefully this sort of approaches the issue from a slightly different angle that you can build on. But I wanted to bring a little bit of extra data into the conversation. I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, but I was reviewing some census data recently and was pointed toward it by a former colleague of mine and someone I admire a lot, Sarah Hastings-Simon of the University of Calgary, who has shown that over 20% of commuting trips are made by single occupant vehicles. And if you take that range up to 10 kilometers, you capture fully 1/3 of weekday commuting. So if we could electrify or mode shift that travel or those person trips, as the economic modelers would call it, it would go a long way, of course, toward electrifying, toward reducing emissions in transport. But I wonder, from a public policy point of view, how do you think about the balance between alternative decarbonization strategies? So on the one hand, the need to get people out of cars and into other cleaner, smaller, cheaper mobility options on the one hand, but then on the other, this recognition that with so many unable or unwilling to abandon personal vehicle ownership, or being locked into forms of, urban geography that just require them to have a car. We need this mass switch to EVs as an environmental imperative. How do you sort of grapple with the relative costs and the investment from public policy into each of those tracks?
I don't think it's that complicated. Getting people into personal EVs is clearly not the first or second priority. The first priority is what people can do on foot or with any form of micromobility. The second priority is transit. Personal vehicles, well, they're at least third. So, in our budget, we did put some money. Well, actually, let me back that up. We didn't put any money into the purchase incentive for electric vehicles. We have the fee-based system to fund that, and that's intended to be temporary. The big investments are into helping municipalities convert road space to safe walking and cycling space, and to electrifying transit and creating dedicated bus lanes, because those have enormously more bang for the buck. What we've seen in other places that are well ahead of us on the electric mobility transformation is it has to be more expensive and less convenient to drive a personal car. And we often find that people don't go there voluntarily. They go there when, you add up your numbers and it doesn't make sense. Norway is at 80% of new car sales are electric. Why? There's a swinging big fee to buy a gas guzzler. You don't pay that fee when you buy an electric car. And of course, it's a lot cheaper to operate. So people buy electric cars because it's cheaper. Copenhagen didn't sit down one day and say, we should all be good people and switch from cars to bikes because we're to be saving the world. Absolutely not. Copenhagen went to bike lanes because they were broke and they couldn't afford to keep building roads. I mean, really, the city, I've heard it was within days of bankruptcy. And the people in Copenhagen turned to bikes because they didn't have much money either, and biking is cheaper. And then they set up the road system. So it's faster to get where you want to go on a bike than it is on a car, because you have to go round and around in the car. So we know that we need sticks and carrots. It has to be expensive to drive a personal vehicle. It has to be cheap and fast and convenient and popular to use, electric micromobility. And when we do that, people switch, and people switch quite fast. If you look at Amsterdam, you look at Paris, look at Seville, the transformations were really quick once it was more expensive to drive and it was safe to take something else. So we don't have to persuade everybody, but we do have to change the balance of incentives. Right now, we provide enormous public subsidies with our money, with our health, with our space, with the quality of our lives, to cars, to personal cars. And we provide basically no subsidies for clean micromobility, and it needs to be the other way around.
Great, thanks for that. And moving us from the personal vehicle again, we're going to close with our last question from Emma about heavy-duty vehicles. And it is something that's been close to EMC's work in the last year, where our Government Relations Committee has been working with a medium and heavy-duty working group, putting a bit more focus on policy recommendations to government and some work on medium and heavy-duty electrification, both vehicles and infrastructure. And for our last question, we'll go to Emma.
Thanks. Yes, I'm taking a swinging wildly the other way towards 18 wheels. So in terms of making a transition to clean mobility in this sector, the medium and heavy duty vehicles, what's your party proposing in terms of everything from, as Maureen just went to, charging infrastructure, to helping businesses who want to transition their fleets to actually be able to afford it, because that's certainly what I'm hearing is the number one deterrent is cost. Number two is availability of vehicles. But, you know, there's a real melting pot of issues here to tackle, but the results could be huge. You take one 18-wheeler off the road, it's the same as taking, you know, possibly 5 or 6 passenger vehicles. So I'd love to hear more about your party's plans here.
Well, we're out of time, of course, and it's a long answer. We have to pay attention both to demand and to supply. So the first thing as a green, we always try to look at root causes first. Why do we have so much heavy vehicle transportation? Well, that's a result of deliberate design choices, including free highways, which make it cost effective for businesses to, for example, have a just-in-time warehouse way out in the sticks and then just have heavy trucks go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then I guess even more simply, I've been told, I mean, I haven't seen the data myself, but I've been told that 1 out of 6 trucks on the road in urban areas is a garbage truck. So do we have better alternatives to that? And there's a number of suggestions for what we can do so that we don't have so many trucks on the road. And again, one of the companies that I interviewed on my podcast has basically a little gadget for liquefying food waste from restaurants and so on, so that it can go safely to the sewer and you eliminate the trucks. So eliminating the need for trucks definitely comes first. A second key thing in terms of human health is to get old trucks off the road. Anything pre-2008 is imposing a disproportionate burden on the human health of everybody around. They should be off the road completely. In terms of moving the truck business to cleaner vehicles, because there is a big range now. So one of the companies I interviewed recently has a Freighterra, a marketplace for people, especially small and medium businesses looking to truck goods, where it gives them the opportunity to choose cleaner truck options. And they're seeing more and more people choose cleaner truck options, among other reasons, because it's cheaper. When it costs $1,000 or $2,000 to fill up the truck, you have to charge more for trucking. Then, of course, there's local delivery. Local delivery is increasingly quicker using electric cargo bike. So FedEx is involved in a pilot project right now with a Curbside Cycle, a bike store in my riding, where they are deploying electric cargo bikes because, just as they saw in Hamburg, it's cheaper, it's faster. You can get a lot more deliveries done. You don't spend so much time looking for parking. You don't get tickets. And then there are the longer term options, which include possibly the use of hydrogen in trucks. But in the first instance, we need to dramatically reduce the number of older trucks on the road. They're a danger to what we breathe. They're in danger to people on bikes. They're a big problem, and we don't need to have them. We have them because of bad habits and inertia, and a lot of that we can change.
Thanks for that response. I think something that we all know is that elections matter. Dianne brought that up earlier. June 2nd is the provincial election. Before I just thank our participants, Dianne, do you want the last 30 seconds for any closing remarks? Anything you think you didn't cover or that you want to highlight? I'll turn the last moment to you.
We know that if Greens aren't at the table, these issues don't get addressed. If you want the vision that I've described here to be taken seriously in Ontario, you need to get involved in the elections. Sitting back and hoping that someone else will do it doesn't get change. If you want change, get involved in the election. You want to work for me? My website's votefordianne.ca. There's still time.
Thanks, Dianne. I appreciate the final plug. Thank you very much, Dianne Saxe, for your participation today. You certainly brought the level of expertise and the level of discussion to a much higher level than we could have imagined. Thank you to our participants, Emma Jarratt of Electric Autonomy, Cara Clairman from Plug and Drive, and my colleague Bora Plumptre from Electric Mobility Canada for your participation in the planning and the organization of this event. We really appreciate all of your interest in these topics. Thank you to the participants who were online watching in, and Election Day is June 2nd. Thank you for providing insights from the Green Party of Ontario, Dianne Saxe. Thank you everyone for joining us.